All right, well, pleasure to be here this afternoon. This is PJ Leash from the UW Insect Diagnostic Lab, and I have a pretty unique viewpoint in the state running the diagnostic lab because I get submissions from um, all across Wisconsin and sometimes other states as well. But I get to see a lot of these new reports when they come in, and I also have a lot of direct contact with colleagues in Department of Agriculture and also DNR in the state. And so it helps everyone keep in the loop of what new insects are showing up. And just to give you a little bit of background, I get about 2,400 samples and cases each year. And in a given calendar year, I probably have 1 to 3 new insect species show up in the state. Some of these species can become established as invasive insects, so we're going to talk about a couple of those today. Some of them might be relatively new, but they aren't going to pose much of a big impact in the state just because it's too cold up here. We're talking about insects that are adapted more for warmer climates. But what I want to do today is just kind of talk about a few insects that I think we should have on our radar looking at 2017. So I'm going to talk about a couple of invasive beetles and also the brown marmorated stinkbug, which has really popped up in the last couple of years. And I've talked about a few of these insects in previous WIFTIN webinars, but I think it never hurts to review them. And also these are some of the insects that I think are going to be the bigger ones we'll want to keep an eye out for. So the first insect I want to talk about is the Viburnum leaf beetle. This particular species is a yellowish, greenish beetle with some black on the wing covers. They are about a 1/4 inch long or a little bit shorter than that, and they can blend in pretty well. And what this species does is it specializes on viburnums. So cranberry bush, viburnum, some of the native arrowwoods can be fed on. And the adults and larvae cause chewing type damage to the leaves, very similar to the damage that Japanese beetles would cause. And we call this type of damage skeletonization because they essentially nibble around the veins, which are too tough for them to chew through. So if you do see this skeletonization or lace-like leaves on viburnums, that's a red flag, and you should do a little bit more digging to see what is causing that. Originally, this insect comes from parts of Europe. It did show up in North America in Canada in the 1940s and then showed up in New England in 1990. So there's a fairly long history of it there. It showed up and became established in the state of Wisconsin back in 2014 in the southeastern area. And I'll show you a map in a coming slide of what to keep an eye out for. So in addition to looking for the skeletonization, another clue, if you do have this in your area, and this is an important management technique, is looking for the egg masses. And it turns out that the female beetles in late summer and early fall, they chew small pits on the twigs, and then they lay about 5 or 6 eggs in these little pits. They cover them up with sawdust and wood debris, and then the eggs sit there through the winter. So that gives us a period of several months, 4 or 5 months or so, where if we do have viburnum leaf beetle in our area, we can go out, scout for these egg sites, and if we see a lot of them, potentially prune those out and destroy those, and we can destroy a lot of insects, and that can help out in terms of management. There is also a UW Extension fact sheet out there if you are looking for additional information on this particular insect. Now, where in particular has this insect been found? It's basically right at that 4-county junction where Milwaukee, Waukesha, Washington, and Ozaukee counties meet. This map here shows essentially our first couple of finds in the state where this insect became established. This is the Glendale area, northern Milwaukee County, but the insect has since been found west of there over towards Waukesha County. And so, as I said, it's right at that junction of Milwaukee, Waukesha, Washington, and Ozaukee County. So if you live in southeastern Wisconsin, definitely something to keep an eye out for. We haven't had tons of cases yet, but we do know it's out there in the state. It seems to be established, and it's only something that I think is going to get worse over time. So that's the first pest to keep an eye out for. This is just a second map showing where a few more of the sightings have been found, as I said, west towards about Menominee Falls. So it is certainly spread out of that Glendale area. The second beetle to have on your radar for the year is a closely related species called the lily leaf beetle. Similar in size, just under about a 1/4 inch long. Luckily for this one, it's fairly easy to identify because it's bright red. And this is yet another species that came from Europe, showed up in Canada in the 1940s, New England in the 1990s. Although this particular insect showed up smack dab in the middle of the state, or north central part of the state, in Wausau area in 2014, it most likely came in the form of infested nursery stock, and it had spread outward from there. Because in that first year, 2014, we had a lot of reports where homeowners were finding it in their yard in Marathon County, so Wausau and some of the surrounding towns. This is a species that feeds primarily on lilies. It likes true lilies. It doesn't like things like daylilies, although it will feed on a number of other excuse me, will feed on a number of other landscape plants as well. So again, they're bright red beetles, just under a quarter-inch long. So something to keep an eye out for in that part of the state. And this is some of the damage that these insects can do. So the adult reddish beetles can cause chewing damage to the leaves. The larvae look very different. They are about a quarter-inch long, kind of yellowish and slimy in appearance. And they also can cause chewing type damage to the leaves. And this slide here shows the distribution of some of our locations. As I said, it showed up in the state in 2014 in Marathon County, so Wausau area. And as I said, I suspect it probably came in an infested nursery stock, so plants at a big box store or a greenhouse or nursery, something like that, have been picked up by homeowners and spread to these other areas. In 2016, we did notice some additional spread outside of Marathon County. We found it as far north as Merrill area in Lincoln County. And then as far south is about Plover in Portage County, so Stevens Point area. So at this point, it has gone from one county to about 4 and spread some considerable distance, most likely because people had picked up plants that were probably infested with the insects, moved them around, and planted them in their own yard. So if you're in that part of the state, this is an insect definitely to keep an eye out for in 2017. And then a relative newcomer to the state is the two-banded Japanese weevil. And in a lot of cases, if you look into the literature, the words two-banded are dropped off the front. A lot of folks refer it simply as Japanese weevil, which unfortunately can be a little bit confusing because we've got Japanese beetle, we've got Asian lady beetles, and so this is something that sounds fairly similar. This is an insect that's native to Japan, although it's actually been in the U.S. for a very, very long time, over 100 years. It was brought over and got into the eastern part of the country, New Jersey area, about 100 or so years ago. In the grand scheme of things, I'm not expecting this particular insect to be terribly bad. Reports from nearby states indicate that it seems to cause relatively minor damage to landscape shrubs, and it will feed on a very wide variety of landscape shrubs. One of the things that will limit its spread is that the adults are not able to fly. And so that means if this insect is going to move around, it either has to be carried somewhere by people or it's got to walk somewhere, and they can't travel very far by walking. The insect itself is just under a quarter-inch long. They have a very plump, pear-shaped body. The abdomen or back end of the insect is a little bit wider than the thorax in the head, so they do have a distinct pear-shaped body, or kind of the shape of a light bulb, if you will. They are grayish in color with some distinct black bands across the wing covers or elytra. We only picked this one up in a single spot in the state in Madison, Wisconsin, last year. So if you are in Dane County, something to keep an eye out for. But also if you're elsewhere in the state, if you see something like this, and especially if it's causing damage to landscape shrubs, there's a possibility it could be this insect. So if you hear of any reports or sightings of this, do go ahead and report them so that we can keep track of this new invasive species in Wisconsin. And then the final insect I want to talk about today is an insect that for a lot of folks needs no introduction, especially if you live in the southern half of the state. This is the brown marmorated stink bug. It's originally from portions of Asia. It's been in the U.S. for about 20 or so years, and it first showed up in Wisconsin back in 2010. Overall, it looks fairly similar to some of our native stink bugs. It's got a distinct shield-shaped body, with a large triangle shape pattern in the middle of the back. A couple of features help identify it compared to some of our native species. Along the back end of the body there is an alternating checkerboard pattern. We can see these white and black patches along the edge of the abdomen. Another really important feature though is the coloration of the antennae. And with brown marmorated stink bug, the antennae are entirely dark, brown or blackish, except there are two pale bands which can be seen with the naked eye. Some of our native stink bugs can have a slightly similar appearance, but the coloration of the antennae is different. They tend to be more of a chestnut, reddish brown, and they won't have those two bands. They might have a single band. Also, if you have brown marmorated stink bug next to some of our native stink bugs, brown marmorated tends to be bigger. It seems to consistently be larger than a half-inch long, whereas our native stink bugs that happen to have a similar appearance tend to be less than a half-inch long. So we can use size as another important clue to identify these. Now, what can the impacts of brown marmorated stink bug be? Unfortunately, this can be a really nasty pest for a lot of folks because this insect can feed on a wide variety of plants, from garden crops like tomatoes and peppers and eggplants to fruit trees like cherries and apples and things like grapes. They can also feed on field crops like corn and soybeans. They also have the ability to sneak indoors in the fall, kind of like box elder bugs. So in a lot of reports that I've heard of, it's folks have spotted these in their homes. Now, when they first showed up in 2010, we didn't find a whole lot of these for the first 4 or 5 years. Once we got to 2015, it seems like their populations are starting to take off. That year we had about 30 or so reports. In 2016, we had an increase of reports, 40 or more reports. In 2017, already I've had 30 to 40 reports, and it's only March right now, so I'm expecting to see a lot more of those. Another interesting thing going on in 2016, we had some of our first reports of juveniles as well as mating adults, and we had our first reports of these insects being found on plants and some potential plant damage going on. Up to that point, we had not encountered these insects outdoors. They were really being spotted indoors or on the sides of structures. So this is definitely something to keep an eye out for in your gardens and orchard situations. And this is just an example of where we had spotted some of the first juveniles outdoors. This is actually Allen Centennial Gardens on the UW-Madison campus. I was leading a group tour last July and spotted some juveniles on the leaves of this flowering dogwood. And these insects can actually feed on ornamental plants in addition to fruits and veggies. And we can see in the second picture here, there are a number of black dots on the leaves. Those are some of the juvenile insects. I do want to point out in this final picture, the juveniles look quite a bit different than the adults in that they can have a very spiky appearance. If you think of the kind of neck or shoulder region behind the head, there's a number of spikes there. Color will be somewhat similar, though, kind of brownish with some white on the body. And in terms of brown marmorated stink bug in the state, it has only been found in about 15 or so counties at this point, and those are the counties shown in orange on this map. There are really 3 hotspots in Wisconsin at this point. Dane County is the hotspot at the moment. From Madison down towards Janesville and Rock County, we have lots and lots of reports, but also southeastern Wisconsin, especially Milwaukee and Waukesha area. And then our third hotspot is the Fox River Valley, Oshkosh on up towards Green Bay. We have had quite a few of these sightings as well. There are a few counties where we've had suspicious or suspected reports of this, and a few more to add would be Greene County, and then also Door County. And if you think of the agricultural situation in Door County with all the fruit production, this insect could be a major concern up there. So if you live outside of these areas in particular, definitely keep an eye out for this insect because we do want to keep track of its spread over time in the state. And with that said, that wraps up kind of my survey of our top invasive insects to keep an eye out for in the state in 2017. If you have any insect-related questions directly for me, you're always welcome to track me down on my website, Twitter, or email me at pleash@wisc.edu.